I read a story this morning, and it was about a man named Cliff Young. Cliff Young was an interesting guy. I'll just read a little bit of this article. It's from a guy named David Allen, and it says it this way. He says, it's a grueling 543.7 mile endurance race from Sydney to Melbourne, Australia, the world's longest and toughest ultramarathon. In 1983, 150 world-class runners converged on Sydney for the event. On the day of the race, a toothless 61-year-old potato farmer and sheep herder named Cliff Young approached the registration table wearing overalls and galoshes over his work boots. At first, people thought he was there to watch the race, but to their surprise, Cliff Young declared his intention to run and requested a number. Cliff Young had grown up on a farm without the benefit of luxuries like horses and four-wheel drives. And when the storms rolled in, Cliff headed out to round up 2,000 sheep over a 20,000-acre farm. Sometimes he had to run them for 2 or 3 days to complete the roundup. The incredulous staff issued Cliff number 64. As he mingled with the other runners at the starting line, spectators could not believe their eyes. This must be a joke, some mused. And when the gun went off, bystanders snickered at Cliff, left behind in his galoshes and overalls, as the other runners with their sculpted bodies and running briskly began the race. Snickers gave way to laughter when Cliff began to run. Not like the other runners, but with what could only be described as a leisurely, odd shuffle. All of Australia was riveted to the live telecast as they watched the scene unfold. Someone should stop that crazy old man before he kills himself. 5 days, 15 hours, and 4 minutes later, Cliff Young came shuffling across the finish line in Melbourne, winning the ultramarathon. He didn't win by a few seconds or even a few minutes. The nearest runner, 9 hours and 56 minutes behind. Australians were stunned by this remarkable yet seemingly impossible victory. How did it happen? Everyone knew that to run the ultramarathon, runners would run for 18 hours, then stop and sleep for 6 hours. This routine was repeated for 5 punishing days. But no one told Cliff Young. He just shuffled along, day and night, night and day without stopping to sleep. Cliff broke the previous race record by 9 hours and became an overnight national hero. Interestingly, professional runners began to study and experiment with the odd shuffle that Cliff used in his running. Many long-distance runners have since adopted what has come to be called the Young aerodynamics and energy efficiency. Anyway, he just goes on to say that victory in the Christian life comes through endurance. The Christian life is not a 100-yard dash. It is a marathon. In the short distance race, speed is important, and in the long distance race, endurance is what leads to success. Now, in our history this morning, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 14. And if you would turn there, we'll talk about this. If you remember the scene, we have King Saul. He is having a hard time bringing together the people of Israel. He had started out with an army of 3,000. His son Jonathan attacked the garrison of the Philistines, and it stirred him up like a hornet's nest. And what had been an army of 3,000, when Saul called for all of Israel to come to the battle, they all scattered and they hid in dens and caves and pits and brushes and brambles and forest glens. Anywhere they could hide, they were hiding. The reason they were doing that? Well, the Philistines had garnered together an army of 36,000 chariots and horsemen, along with an innumerable number of foot soldiers. And so the odds were phenomenal already, with 3,000 to 36,000 plus. And when he called them together, they disappeared. And by the time he returned to the battle scene, he had about 600 men. And so in that story there, we see Saul is probably a little discouraged. He's probably a little worried about the outcome. And instead of turning to the Lord, he goes to a place and he hides under a pomegranate tree, and they discuss what's going to happen. This is one of the great dangers for us, I think, is that when we come into problems, when we come into challenges, so many times we just sit down and we discuss the problem. And you see in this chapter, we're going to see several character studies of these guys. Saul's heart is just not in it. And not only that, but his heart is not towards the Lord. So turn with me here, 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 1. It came to pass upon a day, another way you could say that is now one day, Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man that bore his armor, "Come on, let's go over to the Philistines' garrison that's on the other side." But he didn't tell his father. And Saul tarried in the uttermost part of Gibeah, under a pomegranate tree, which is Migron. And the people that were with him were about 600 men. And Ahiah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, was there wearing an ephod, and the people did not know that Jonathan was gone. Ahiah is the great grandson of Eli. If you remember the story, I think it's from about chapter 4. Eli and his two sons are abusing their office of leadership in the priesthood. They are getting literally fat off of the offerings that they're not supposed to be eating of. The part that belongs to the Lord they were taking for themselves. His two sons are godless, and they are corrupt, and they are immoral, and yet they are serving there before the people and before the Lord. They are thieves and crooks and robbers, and they're just godless as can be. But yet God has allowed them to be there in that leadership. So God judges Eli and his sons, and all three of them die in the same day. And as his granddaughter, I believe, is giving birth, she dies in the midst of childbirth, and the child that is born they name Ichabod. Ichabod means the glory has departed. The glory has departed. So here is Ichabod's brother there, Ahiah. I think maybe this is mentioned because it's pointing out that the glory has departed. Do you remember in Saul's life, he was told to wait for Samuel to come down for 7 days to offer sacrifice before they went to battle. And it came to the seventh day, and it was late in the day, and Samuel had not showed up yet. So Saul took it upon himself. He was very presumptuous, and he took on the role of the priesthood. He took on that which for us belongs only to Jesus Christ. And he assumed that he had the ability and therefore the right to do that very thing. And Samuel said, "You have sinned greatly. You have been presumptuous. You've done that which you shouldn't do, that which is reserved only for the priests." And the Lord had appointed it that way. And he said, because of that, the kingdom will be taken from your hand and given to another man, a man after God's own heart. In other words, the glory had departed from Saul. And so I think that this man here, Ahiah, is there because of that representation. That he is there, they mentioned that he's Ichabod's brother because the glory has departed. Ahiah, by the way, means the brother or the friend of God. So even though he's there and he's the friend of God, he is yet a reminder that God has withdrawn his glory from Saul. And he's there wearing an ephod. They would pray, and they believe that the Lord had appointed this, that with that ephod, the Lord would speak to that man, to that priest, and then they would communicate that to the people. That he became an intercessor or an intermediary between the people and the Lord. Now, when it says here, it just happened one day. Remember, they are in the midst of this. The Philistine army has split into 3 companies, so you probably have anywhere from 15 to 20,000 men still here at Michmash, and you have 600 men under Saul. The odds are just phenomenal. And you too would probably be worried about the outcome, especially if you remember that the men who are with Saul, there's only 2 guys that have spears and swords, and that's Saul and his son Jonathan. All the rest of them are armed with what? Farming implements. They have hoes, and they have axes, and they have plows and things of that nature, but they don't have a single sword or spear among them, except with Joshua and with Saul. Or pardon me, not Joshua, Jonathan and Saul. Pardon me. All right. So, have you ever had one of those mornings you wake up and you go, oh, good Lord, it's morning. What is going to happen today? Some people, though, they wake up and what's their first thought? They go, oh, good morning, Lord. What is going to happen today? You can see that with these 2 guys. Saul is waking up in the morning. He's going, oh, good Lord, it's morning. What is going to happen today? How much worse could it get? On the other hand, Jonathan woke up with his armor bearer and he goes, good morning, Lord. What is going to happen today? He says, let's get up and go see what the Lord might do over in the camp of the Philistines. Now, he's a man of faith, Jonathan. He is the captain of a host. He's bold. He trusts the Lord. He believes the Lord is able to do that which he has promised. He is able to deliver from the enemy. The armor bearer, we never get to find out his name, but the armor bearer is a lot like you would want a Christian to be. The armor bearer follows his captain into battle no matter what. He carries the weapons. He's depending on that captain for his protection. He defends that captain, and he aids his captain. He makes sure that as the captain, in this case Jonathan, goes through and attacks people, he makes sure that they're really dead. It's his job to polish them off if they're not quite polished off yet, so that he can't attack Jonathan. So he's working side by side with Jonathan. And Jonathan's doing the work, but he is there to finish the work that the Lord began, or rather that his captain began. Now, he needs to be brave, he needs to be trusting, he needs to be loyal, and he needs to be strong. Just like a Christian is called to those very same qualities. We're to be trusting and brave and loyal. Now, if Jonathan said, let's go, what should be the armor bearer's response? I don't know. There's a lot of those guys over there. Right? No, that's not what we would do. If we were an armor bearer like Jonathan's, we'd say, okay, I believe that you know what you're doing, and I'm just going to follow you. I know that you've got this figured out, so I'm just going to trust and follow and obey what you say. So he says, okay, let's do it. So he trusts that Jonathan knows. Now Saul, as this chapter opens up, Saul's a leader, and remember he's been abandoned. He's down to 600 men. The rest of Israel has fled. He doesn't really want to fight. You're going to see that in here. He's scared about the outcome. How can 600 guys armed with, well, in our day and age, it would be like, could you imagine going up against an army of guys with automatic weapons, and all you have is clubs, axes, chainsaws, right? Maybe a BB gun, things of that nature. And you're going to go up and believe that somehow you can win this war. That's what they're up against. The Philistine army is decked out with the top technology of the day. and these guys have farming implements. And the reason they only have farming implements is the Philistines have guaranteed, assured, that they would have nothing but farming implements. They've taken all the weapons away and allowed them only to have those tools that they need for farming. So, Saul doesn't really want to fight. He has lost his faith. He's lacking trust. Probably discouraged, probably a little depressed. And he's not seeking the Lord. We don't find him seeking the Lord here under the pomegranate tree. He's hanging out talking with everybody, but he's really just seeking his own protection. He's seeking what's going to be best for Saul. And he's worried about his life. And so he's a man who is kind of the picture of a guy who says he believes, or a gal says that they believe, but yet they really, in reality, they're lacking faith completely. Jesus said this of the Pharisees and the Sadducees in Matthew 15. He says, these people draw near to me with their mouth, and they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. I think we're going to see a little bit of that with Saul. In the army, you can imagine they're discouraged as well. And so I think that there's good reason for those people to flee. They probably said the same thing. How can we possibly go up against this? Now, Saul has that priest with him. It's probably more of a talisman with the ephod than it is really a belief, or it's the appearance of religion. All right, verse 4, Jonathan here, we see he sees a strategic position, even just being two men. And so he says, between the passages by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp rock on one side and a sharp rock on the other side. And the name of the one was Bozez, and the name of the other Sanah. And the forefront of the one was situated northward over against Michmash, and the other southward over against Gibeah. Now, if you remember, we were told a couple chapters back that you had Michmash on one side of this ravine or this canyon, and on the other side was Gilgal, and there was a deep chasm between it, and it was a passageway, and they were just a mile or a couple miles separate. So if you had an army of 15 or 20,000 people, you could pretty easily see that army on the hillside a mile away, or even several miles away. It's likely that Saul, being at Migdol, is probably 45 minutes or an hour's walk away, but he can still has guards that are watching that hillside. I know if you, for instance, had the pictures of the news, they'll take shots from far away of like a big concert scene or the ball game or something like that, or Burning Man or whatever, and you'll see all the people out there in the desert, and you know it's a gigantic crowd. That's the same sort of situation here. But there is a passageway which climbs up towards the camp of the Philistines, and that's where he's going to go. It's a narrow passageway, and it's surrounded on both sides by steep rocks. And so if you were to have a battle there, it would limit the number of people that could come at you. It's a very strategic place to fight men one-on-one. You have better chances of not getting attacked by too many guys at one time. So he's there, and the forefront of the one was against Michmash, the other's over by Gibeah. And Jonathan said to the young man that bore his armor, "Come on, let's go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us. For there's no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few." In other words, God doesn't need a lot of people to achieve his means. He doesn't need a huge crowd to win. And so he says God can save by a lot of people, big army, or it can save by just a couple. Now, how did he defeat the Egyptians when they came out of Egypt? Do you remember? They drowned in the sea, the Red Sea. God just closed the sea over and there was no battle. God defeated them without a soldier. Certainly two men. Maybe the Lord will deliver. We don't know. So he says, let's go up and see if the Lord will deliver us. his armor bearer said, well, do everything that's in your heart. Turn yourself. Behold, I'm with you according to your heart. Man, my heart, your heart, we're on the same page. Let's do it. I'm going wherever you go. That's the way we should be with the Lord, with Jesus. Lord, I don't care where you go. Wherever you go, I will follow. Whatever you want to do, Lord, let's do it. I'm going to follow after you. That is a man of faith. Instead of sitting under the pomegranate tree worried about how it's going to turn out and not seeking the Lord, here he is. He's like, hey, let's find out if the Lord wants to do something. And so he says, we'll go see. So what does he do? He says, look, we're going to pass over to these men and we will show ourselves to them. And if they say to us, wait until we get to you, well, then we'll stand still in our place. We won't go up to them. In other words, we won't go to battle against them if they say, just wait there. We're coming down to get you. But if they say to us, come up, well, then we'll go up because the Lord has delivered them into our hand, and this will be a sign for us. Can you imagine? There's an army of 20,000 guys probably waiting up there on top of that hill. It's a steep ravine. And he says, hey, if they say to us, come on up, we want to show you something, we'll go, hey, the Lord's given them to us. And we'll go, just you and me, buddy. I don't know. I think I'd be praying along with the disciples and some of the others. The Lord, I have faith, but help my unbelief, help my lack of faith, right? I think I'd be like, Lord, I believe you can do it, but there's a part of me that doesn't believe. Would you help me with that unbelief? In Deuteronomy, if you get a chance, read chapter 32. But it's all about how the Lord has blessed his people and they still turn from him. But in there's a verse, 32:30. It says, how should one chase 1,000 and two put 10,000 to flight except their rock, capital R, had sold them and the Lord had shut them up? You see, how would Jonathan and his armor bearer ever be successful unless the Lord had sold the Philistines out to Jonathan and his armor bearer? And unless he had shut them up. The Lord has a way of striking fear into people, unbelievers especially, when he wants to get his message across. So both of them showed themselves, discovered themselves to the garrison of the Philistines, and the Philistines said, look, the Hebrews are coming forth out of the holes where they have hidden themselves. And the men of the garrison answered Jonathan and his armor bearer, and they said, come on up, we have something to show you. And Jonathan said to his armor bearer, come up after me, because the Lord has given them or delivered them into the hand of Israel. So Jonathan, look at how steep this is. Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet. He is clawing his way up the hillside. And can you defend yourself? Can you pull out your sword when you're on such a steep slope like that? No. So he's climbing up, and his armor bearer is following up after him. And they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer killed after him. So Jonathan's whacking them down with his sword, and the armor bearer is making sure they're good and dead. It's a pretty interesting scene. And at that first slaughter, which Jonathan and his armor bearer made, was about 20 men. These two guys have just climbed a steep canyon wall. They're probably tired, and certainly, a little bit of strain there. And yet he still has the strength by the power of the Lord to kill 20 of his enemies. To kill them. And the armor bearer is like, yeah, and he just goes and he makes sure they're good and dead. So, there was trembling in the host. Look at this. This is a supernatural event that takes place here. There's trembling in the host. There's trembling in the field. There's trembling among all the people. There's trembling in the garrison. There's trembling by the spoilers. Remember, they broke into 3 bands. The other 2 bands aren't even there. And there's trembling in those bands of spoilers. They also trembled, and even the earth was shaking. The earth quaked. So it was a very great trembling. Another version might say they were trembling exceedingly. Now, in Deuteronomy chapter 2, it also says, this day, this is a picture of what the Lord is doing, this day I will begin to put the dread of you and the fear of you upon the nations that are under the whole heaven, who shall hear a report of you, and they will tremble, and they will be in anguish because of you. This was the message of God to Moses as he says, I'm going to take you into that promised land. And as the people around you see the hand of the Lord delivering you, my people Israel, I'm going to put fear and dread into them. And just the mention of your name is going to terrify them. And so here you have Jonathan, his armor bearer, going up. This is the Lord acting to terrify them, to put a trembling upon them. Let's go back to our chapter. Verse 16, the watchmen of Saul and Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away. Think of that. You have this huge army. You have people observing from a distance, and they see it looks like butter or syrup running down pancakes, right? And it just starts dripping down the side of the mountain. They are fleeing. But not only are they fleeing, look, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down one another. Now the Lord has turned the Philistines' swords upon themselves, and they are killing each other as they are fleeing. It's a stampede. And so Saul says to the people that are with him, hey, which of you guys did that? Who's missing here? Who went and without my permission went out and fought these guys? Who went out? There's got to be somebody missing here. You see, Saul wants to be in charge, and he's already losing charge. People haven't shown up to fight the battle with him. God's already said, I'm going to take your kingdom and give it to another man. And then he says, well, who's missing? I think there might be a little bit of fear here in Saul that this man, whoever this is that the Lord is using to chase down and chase away the Philistines, might very well be the man that God is calling to replace him. It's not that way, but it looks like Saul might be getting a little nervous here. Now, they melted away. The people said, number now, and Saul said to him, number now and see who's gone from us. And when they had numbered, look, Jonathan and his armor bearer weren't there. And Saul said to Ahiah, bring here the ark of God, because the ark of God was at that time with the children of Israel. And it came to pass, while Saul talked to the priest, that the noise was in the host of the Philistines went on and increased. And Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. Do you know what he's really saying? He's saying to the priest, quit praying. It's time for action. Quit praying. Can you believe that? If I was Saul, I'd be like, man, get some more guys up here. Keep praying while we go into battle. Right? When you're in that situation, you're outnumbered and the Lord's beginning to work, this is the time to start praying and to have other people praying. If you haven't been praying yet, you need to get somebody praying. Do you remember the battle? Moses is there, and his brother Aaron, and I forgot I think it's Joshua is the other guy, and they're holding up Moses' arms. As long as he held his arms up, praying for the battle, Israel would win. But as soon as his arms began to drop, then the enemy would start to take advantage. And so the Lord would desire in that situation to have prayer going on. But he says to the priest, hey, quit praying. We got to get down there. Where is his heart? Where is Saul's heart in this? So, notice too, what is Saul's first reaction here? It's pretty interesting. What's his first reaction? His first reaction is to, hey, the Lord's doing something over there. We ought to pray and find out if it's safe for us to go down there. Do you think we should go down or not? Man, the Lord's already moving. You ought to go join the battle. We got to remember, what was Saul's calling? Why did God raise up Saul? Because God was going to deliver the Philistines at the hand of Saul. He already knew his mission. He already knew his calling. He already knew what he was appointed to do. He didn't need to ask the Lord, should I go after the Philistines? He already knew he was supposed to go after the Philistines. And honestly, instead of sitting under the pomegranate tree, he should have been praying under the pomegranate tree if he didn't want to be close to the battle. They should have been seeking the Lord before this time ever got to this place. Now, if you keep on going here. Oh, actually, let me read to you something here. This is the way Matthew Henry put it. So Saul wanted to know if it was safe to attack the Philistines. He's more concerned for his safety, notice, than for his duty. More concerned for his safety. So Saul, he began to inquire of God, but soon desisted. His spirit had not come down so far as to allow him to consult Samuel, though it's probable he was nearby. Because remember, Samuel went to Gibeah. Now, he wants to know, is it safe? And so this is what Matthew Henry said. He said, many will consult God about their safety, but they would never consult him about their duty. Many of us will consult the Lord about our safety, but we won't consult him about our duty. And perceiving that the noise in the enemy's camp had increased, he commanded the priest that officiated to break off abruptly. Withdraw your hand. Don't ask any longer. I'm not waiting for an answer, Lord. He just went. Now, either he didn't think he needed an answer now, or even though he had more reason to, but in fact, now he's in such a haste, he's not going to wait. And he's really acting in a very carnal fashion here. You know, the Bible tells us to take heed that when we think we are standing, that we actually are going to end up falling. Saul, in this case, is tempting or testing the Lord in the situation. And in 1 Corinthians, we're told, let us not tempt Christ. Some of them were tempted and they were destroyed by serpents. Remember in the wilderness, God said, hey, if you'll make a bronze serpent and just look at the bronze serpent, I'll heal you when you're bitten. Otherwise, you'll die from this viper's bite. And some tested or tempted the Lord. They said, yeah, I'm not looking. And so they died there in the wilderness. He says, don't murmur. Some of them murmured. They were destroyed by the destroyer. And all those things happened for examples. And they're written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore let him that thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. And then he goes on to say in 1 Corinthians 10, he says, there has no temptation taken you, no testing, no trial that has taken you except or but such as is common to man. The things that we are tested and tempted and tried by are the very same things that everyone else is tested and tried by. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you or allow you to be tempted above that which you are able. But with the temptation will also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. So God says, you know what, you're in this test, and I allowed you to be in this test, but you know what, there is a way out, and you need to look to me to find the way out of this testing or this trial. Trust that he is able to do that which he has promised. But even so, the battle's raging, and Saul he's hesitant to enter in. He wants to know who had the nerve to go to battle without him. He wants to see who in the world believed the Lord that much. And in fact, Saul's biggest problem is not the army of the Philistines. And it's not that Israel is despised or disesteemed. His biggest problem is really that lack of faith in God and the promises. And he does not act until he sees God already working. That is not faith. To act only when you see God already acting. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, is what the scripture tells us. The evidence of things not seen. He didn't see it yet. He didn't see how it was going to happen. The Lord had commanded him to go, but he wasn't going. He was waiting until the Lord actually moved before he stepped out in what was no longer faith, but really it was sight, not faith. We're told right after that in Hebrews 11 that without faith it's impossible to please him. Because he that comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. We haven't seen Saul diligently seeking the Lord here. Anyway, let's go to verse 20. Saul and all the people that were with him assembled themselves, and they came to the battle. Finally. And behold, every man's sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great, King James says, discomfiture. Isn't that a great word? It means an exceedingly great destruction. You got two guys who are in the battle when they get there, and there's great destruction going on. The Lord is destroying the army from within. They're tearing each other apart. Now, moreover, the Hebrews that were with the Philistines before that time, which went up with them into the camp from the country round about, even they also turned to be with the Israelites that were with Saul and Jonathan. There's really, I can come up with two reasons why the Hebrews might have been with the Philistines. One is that they're slaves. They could have been enslaved or in bondage to the Philistines, and they could have been taken up there. The other could be that just like those that were hiding out, they were really treasonous, and they went to go hang out with the Philistine army, which was so great they thought they might be safer there than out in the field. But in any case, those men, those Hebrews that were with the Philistines before the time of the battle, and went up with them into the camp, even they also turned to be with the Israelites that were with Saul and Jonathan. They are returning to the people of the Lord, and they are fighting now with them. And I compare it to those who you've got supposedly a favorite team. And this year, your favorite team is the underdog. They're losing badly. And there's one team that's just, man, they're going to sweep. They're going to sweep the finals. They're going to go to Super Bowl, or they're going to go to, right? And you're like, all right, that's my team. That's always been my favorite team. Didn't you see? I tore all the posters off my wall, but I put the new ones up. Can you tell that those are the guys I've always been rooting for? That's what I see these guys like. Israel's winning again? Yeah. Didn't you know I was always for the underdog? I've been there, Lord, right? Remember me? And so they, likewise, listen to this, all the men of Israel which had hidden themselves. They get wind of the battle going on here. And they which had hidden themselves in Mount Ephraim, when they heard that the Philistines were fleeing, even they also followed hard after them in the battle. Man, everybody wants to be with the underdogs when they're winning. Right? Oh, I support the little guy. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed over to Beth-aven. Now, how are we doing? I think we might quit right here, because the whole next section is just as full. What we have is Saul is about to make some serious poor choices. His lack of judgment causes Israel to fall into massive sin. He is really the source of the sin in Israel because of his attitude and because of his actions. And he wants to be successful, and he wants to be safe, and he wants to have the appearance of being in control. And so this is where he goes with this. If you look, we'll just read the next couple of verses, but we'll take it up next week. It says, the men of Israel were distressed that day. Why are they distressed? It's not because of the battle. It's because of their king. Their king put them into distress. Saul had adjured or ordered the people, saying, "Cursed be the man that eats any food until the evening, that I may be avenged on my enemies." Why is he doing this? So that who can be avenged? So Saul can be avenged. So Saul can, not that the Lord can be avenged or the people can be avenged, but that Saul can be avenged. I want to get even with my enemies. And so none of the people tasted any food, and all they of the land came to a wood, and there was honey on the ground. Anyway, they've been told not to eat. Can you imagine? This is a mountainous, hilly country. They've probably had to ascend that same hill that Jonathan crawled up on his hands and knees and gets up there. And so they may have gone an easier way, but in any case, they had to go to the heights, and then they chased these guys all day long, fighting and killing and picking up swords and doing whatever they need to. And they're in the battle, and they've been told, don't eat anything. They're burning calories like crazy, and they've been told not to eat. What's going to happen is they're going to be famished by the end of the day. And they're going to break God's law in order to feed themselves, because they're so ravenous that they cast all law aside and just follow after the lust of the flesh. But in some ways, they can't be held responsible. They are starving to death. They are exceedingly weary. So we need to be careful that we're not like Saul, where we lead people into sin. We have traditions or ordinances or things of that nature that we would want to impose on people to keep them from something that's actually good and beneficial and helpful. Anyway, let's pray. God, we just pray that you would bless these words, that you would cause them in our life to trust in you, to follow after you, to believe that even against impossible odds, that the things that you've called us to do, the ministries that you've called us to, Lord, that you would show yourself strong on your own behalf, that you would direct us and guide us and lead us, that we would hear your voice clearly, just like Jonathan had heard from you to test the Philistines, whether to come up or to stay low, that you would speak just as clearly to us in our situations, our problems, the things that are going on in our life. And that, Lord, that you would, again, minister to us and through us and lead folks in this valley to come to know you. We ask these things in your precious name, Jesus. Amen.